Hey, what is up? What is up, YouTube family? It is IK right here, back at it with another video for y'all today. Um, yeah, let's get right into it, man. I got another Fight Night champion video. Credit to this YouTuber, Boxing Fight Simulations. Definitely go subscribe to him. Love watching his content. This is a pretty old video that he has between a what if matchup between the greats, Errol, the true Spence Jr. representing Dallas, Texas, but he from New York, so New York, Texas stand up versus Puerto Rico's own, aka Borican, Miguel Cotto. I think honestly, this fight, as far as like a what if fight, would have been one of like, the best fights in boxing history. I'll definitely make a fight I'll definitely make like a what if fight matchup, video for for fights like this. Not specifically for that fight, but I'll just talk about like specifically for like a fighter like Miguel Cotto's career of like how far with many names that he could have fought. But I think overall, this type of fight matchup definitely would have been like the best matchup for both the career for, Miguel Cotto and obviously, Errol, obviously Errol Spence Jr. But yeah, that's besides the point. We actually have some political pep talk for y'all tonight. I'm gonna give you guys my whole take on what's going on in the beautiful island of Puerto Rico, aka Borican. So I won't like personally with me. I wanted to kind of talk about what's going on, with up the island economically, and I'm not gonna give you guys like my whole spiel about everything that will be brought up for this particular video. Specifically, my whole take on what's going on with everything in the island. Granted, I'm not from the island, and I don't ever have to think about what's going on, but I still make my contributions to try to use any funds that I try to put my money into to try to help out for the people of Puerto Rico, because like I do have bloodline to be rooted from there. But but before I get into that, be sure to hit the like button, share this video around, and hope you guys enjoy this video commentary. So basically, my whole take is what's going on economically in the island. Specifically, of a few things. I'm just gonna give you like my whole take on things. Personally, number one is obviously the whole economic situation where Puerto Rico is not able to sustain with, I guess, the federal stipends that kind of limit them, as a like economy, without the U.S. Placing a lot of economic, like how should I say, economic restrictions and making it more harder for for the people to actually sustain. Um, I think economically, like Puerto Rico has always been that type of like economy that has been corrupted by, I want to say, socialist like entities, and the economy has been strangled by the U.S. Federal government, where Puerto Ricans are not able to like actually trade within the economy with other countries because one, obviously with the Jones Act, that is naturally evil, where that is designated to prevent any foreign trade to be made into Puerto Rico. So therefore, any nation that wants to send resources to Puerto Rico to trade, that all has to be administered through the U.S. Federal government. So they make that decision of like where those resources will go, and then better yet, they could very well steal those particular resources too. So I think that I think that like in it of itself is very evil and very disrespectful of the U.S. Government alone. Other things that also root into what's problematic within Puerto Rico is obviously the hurricane damages. That is to be like accounted every so often. Obviously that being like Hurricane Maria, Hurricane I want to say Idalia. That that was like a pretty bad one, and I'm not too sure about Hurricane Irene. I think I don't think Irene really. Yeah. Oh man, look, I'm so sorry. Yeah, I don't think Irene had ever hit Puerto Rico that hard. I could very well be wrong off of that, but yeah, I don't think that ever went that too crazy. But I do know Hurricane. Yeah, yeah, I do know Hurricane Maria was definitely one of the worst ones that has really hurt the island pretty bad. And I do remember donating my money for that, and I try to help out as best I can. So I try to give it to the right organizations for that. But I mean, like overall, where things are at within Puerto Rico, I guess to a long term economic degree, I want to say it's doing decent, but it's obviously not doing well. Because if it was doing well, then there'd be far more economic success that the island can easily sprout. And I don't know what's really going on as far as how much money isn't really being generated within the island, but it's definitely within the root of being borderline third world poor. And personally with me, I don't understand why it's like that. I want to say part of that is definitely the United States government holding them back because for those of you that want to just have the quick particular rundown, within Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico, obviously, a massive, historic roots with the Taino, have them having to live there for thousands of years, and then obviously, living on other parts of other parts of the Caribbean, that being Haiti, Jamaica, the Bahamas, Turks and Caicos, Virgin Islands, Montserrat. I mean, I can keep on going. The Cayman Islands. I mean, there's a lot of history that nobody talks about, and even even in even in parts of Florida. I want to say in southwest Florida or southeast Florida. Definitely right by the Miami. Yeah, definitely right by the Miami region over by the Biscayne Bay. That that was historically recorded with the Taínos from Cuba that managed to go over from Cuba over to Florida, and then they managed to bring their ancestry over there. They did unfortunately get imprisoned by the Calusa, American Indians down there. But I want to say throughout time, they actually ended up bringing their ancestry over there, which I want to say that then evolved with the Tequesa tribe down in Florida. I'm not too sure if that's possibly correct, but I'd I would definitely need to get back and actually look at that particular research because I want to say the Tequesa tribe is actually related with the Taino, simply with their traditions, everything that they've done, and all that. But obviously, back to what I was saying with the Taino ancestry, that's very massive within Puerto Rico. But obviously, the Spanish had unjustifiably invaded them, and then tried to interfere with their culture and try to take everything away from them to enslave them. And that's where that the whole mess of the colonial invasion had destroyed that the island for quite some time, simply due to slavery, mercantilism, a lot of coercive policies that the Spanish themselves, clearly admitted that their economic systems were not really designed to even help the people grow. It was more so to, expropriate, economies to fund European, militaries at that time. But then eventually, they ended up losing because it's they couldn't keep up with the amount of costs of war that they were having to wage up against the people that were living there, that being the Taino, and then the people that they try to mix with to try to be the quote unquote Hispanic population of Puerto Rico. But that's obviously European invasion trying to basically intermarry people and try to make people a part of them, type BS. So, I mean, that's the evils that that were done, and the Spanish should pay, they should brutally pay for their crimes. So I think, furthermore, as far as where things are at right now, I do believe, where it does stand, I believe Puerto Rico is to be one of the oldest colonies within the Caribbean, at least up to 500 years old, which is quite wild. But I think Puerto Rico can very well succeed, and I would like to see them succeed, which I'm going to explain that later on in this particular video. Um, other islands that I know that are still quote unquote like territories, um, they I want to say those islands would be, obviously, like Hawaii, that's still part of the U.S. You got Guam, you have the U.S. Virgin Islands. I believe the Cayman Islands, those are still Cayman Islands. I think that's British, but also Americans have control over that. Like you have like obviously like the rest of the islands, like that being the Turks and Caicos, Montserrat. I know that's British, if I'm not to be mistaken. But I mean, a lot of their influences, have been poorly, interfered, by the Europeans. So, I mean, more so like a lot of the Taino roots have been hidden, and that's what not a lot of people really do talk about, because they try to think like, oh, the Taino are gone, just get over it, blah blah blah. Like, no, like that's just evil, and that's what most government, institutionalized empires would do to people to brainwash them. But good enough, a lot of their heritage is actually, well, no, well documented throughout certain parts of the Caribbean. That being Puerto Rico, they have a lot of Taino ancestry roots, especially in cities like, Utuado, Manawabo, and I believe Jayuya, and I forgot what other parts of it, but I do believe there's also festivals that were being held, within those parts of the areas. I want to say specifically Hayuya, because Hayuya, they have like Taino, yeah, yeah, they have Taino festivals that people get together, and people are embracing their cultural bloodline, and there are, I guess, activists per se of people of Taino heritage that actually stands up for that, and they actually, bring people together, and they're preserving their bloodline for that particular manner. But yeah, I mean, historically, like as far as what people don't want to hear, like that's definitely something that's important to not only just in Puerto Rico, but that's throughout all the other Taino territories, that the ancestry of the Taino bloodline that is particularly rooted from the Arawak South American bloodline, that being the Dominican Republic, aka Quisqueya. You have Cuba, aka Cubanacan. You like there is Haiti and there is Jamaica, but they're African dominated for now. But ideally, for a good portion of the DNA that a lot of people like to claim to say that's that Taino DNA is at a minority, I would say to a good level of like where the good portion of the bloodlines are there. That's definitely within Puerto Rico, the DR, and Cuba. And anywhere else, if those people are still out there, they probably have what their interconnected roots, depending on what those people get in contact with for. So either way, like I'm very proud of it, and like I always like to stick up for it, because I find that to be very important. But yeah, I mean, Puerto Rico specifically has had a pretty tough history, and to this day, there's always been, like a lot of political like oppression coming from the United States government, where they've used Puerto Rico as a political puppet, or more so a political victim, to enslave, the people. Obviously with the evil history of the U.S. Army using Puerto Rico as a bombing site to drop bombs onto the island of Puerto Rico, in places like, Vieques and Culebra for, for a military bombing, like, bombing test sites, which I find that to be evil and absolutely disgusting from the U.S. Military. Other things, that being the Jones Act, absolutely evil, very disgusting from the U.S. Army. Um, I mean, there's like obviously just like a whole bunch of stuff. The evil sterilization policies that the U.S. government did to Puerto Rican women in the early 1940s or 1950s, and then obviously during World War One and World War Two, if I'm not to be mistaken, Puerto Ricans were brutally sent off to war, where they ended up dying and being treated like crap throughout the entirety of those two wars. I want to say specifically World War Two was probably the worst, and then obviously the North Korean War as well. Being sent off to fight in that BS war as well. But I want to say the Vietnam War too. So I mean, there's like a lot of messed up history for that, but like I don't shrug like away from it because it's important and that's something that needs to be called out because it's evil. So I mean, there's like a whole bunch of stuff that I can keep on going with that. As far as where it stands right now, the economy is definitely in shambles. I think what could very well be done to fix the economy is having secession. America is holding a lot of economic suppression onto the economy for the sake of utilizing it for, particular means to expropriate resources from the people that are living there. And yeah, hold on. Let me put you guys on pause. I'm gonna hold on. Like I'm gonna be right back. Like I gotta do something real quick. All right, I'm back. So yeah, back to what I was saying. I think as far as how the economy is to be fixed within Puerto Rico, I had initially stated that secession is basically the only way. America, as far as the U.S. trying to provide any economic support to Puerto Rico, isn't really effective at all. Simply because the U.S., for anybody that wants to know, America, holds Puerto Rico as a Commonwealth territory. So Puerto Rico is not a state for the particular being that Puerto Rico only gets federal stipends from the U.S., federal government, in which I want to say Congress, like administers that. So therefore, anything that that's being legislated through, X amount of money that's being given to Puerto Rico every year, that's what the government's budget is basically held off of. So basically, they're only getting funded through the federal taxes that the government's able to fund, over in Puerto Rico. And I do know the Puerto Rican government, they have their own laws that they particularly create, and they have everything to be like abided, through their own policies. So the U.S. government, they hold influence, within Puerto Rico, but they don't tell the people exactly what to do. So the politicians don't really have a say over there, other than let the people that run the government, whether they could be, how should I say, the governor, and then maybe some House of Representatives, or maybe I don't even know, maybe local congressional boards. I'm not too sure, what exactly Puerto Rico really does for that, but that would make sense for the people of Puerto Rico to have some sort of local governance that that is to be nationalistically connected with their own government. So I mean, that would make more sense, because it's like if the U.S. government was to control it, then that would just make it like a state by that particular manner. So, if you had Puerto Rico being like a state, which would definitely be way worse, but you'd have politicians telling people what to do, and these people don't even care to really understand what's really going on. But I mean, more so, that's like telling a whole group of people from another part of the world, like, hey, this is going to be your politician. You guys are just going to deal with it. And I mean, that's basically what ended up happening to Puerto Rico. Like, when they first had, I forgot who that white guy's name was from the U.S., but like the very first governor that was ever put into office into Puerto Rico, that was like a U.S. White guy that I want to say he was like a Democrat or a like basically he was either a corrupt Democrat or a corrupt Republican, and he didn't care about nobody. He was just trying to make authoritarian laws, and he was just a piece of shit, asshole. But yeah, Puerto Rico doesn't need that. Like if something ever mattered within the island, it's definitely sticking up for your bloodline and definitely sticking up for the identity for what the island is to be meant for. And I think that's important. People like to, praise the, El Grito de Lares, flag, in which, to me personally, as a libertarian, I don't support revolutions. I think revolutions are unjustified. But in terms of Puerto Rico, I do believe that defensive violence is a thing. And I think having some means of political resistance does matter in times of war and conflict. So I'm definitely with the people on that for the sense of defensive violence. Now, offensively using violence for the sake of political, tyranny and trying to tell people what to do, to just basically do the same thing what the colonial counterparts, have always done, I don't think that's a good idea. You could see that within the United States specifically, where the U.S. government has gotten way more corrupted compared to the British government. And the U.S. should have been an economy where it should have been founded on principle and understanding, human liberty to the fullest, level of which the government does not tell people what to do, which that would then lead into pure anarchy at that point. But, this is in the sense of pure conservatism, where monarchy should be the law of the land and government should not be telling people how to operate within their lives. So that's pretty much like what the whole message of the US was supposed to be for. But sadly, that was never to be the case, because you still had slavery, you still had all these evil things. But better yet, slavery was already being taken out in the US way before, 1865. It's just that as far as it being continued as a national concept of like what states were trying to push for slavery, yes, that was evil. And that was mostly done within the South, and then certain parts of certain northern states were still keeping slavery up until a certain point, way before way before 1865. And for those of you that may want to know which state actually became like the very first state to eliminate slavery way before 1865, that was technically modern day Vermont in 1777, and then later became Massachusetts within 1783 to have slavery to be abolished. And then I want to say, for my state, in the great state of New York, I believe New York became the third state in 1821 to get rid of slavery, if I'm not to be mistaken. But I could be wrong. But I have to go back and, oh man, I'm so sorry. I have to go back and particularly research that just to make sure that is to be correct. But I want to say, to my knowledge, even though that I am very tired, I want to say New York, is the third state, because I did remember doing some particular research off of that, where New York actually became the third state, within like American history to follow behind Massachusetts to end slavery. And then all the other states, within the U.S. at that time, before and after the American Civil War, ended slavery, at a particular degree, where, that was mostly done through civil conflict, and then politicians ended up conceding to getting rid of slavery. But that's besides the point from Puerto Rico. Like, as far as like my whole argumentation, like, I don't think using violence is the answer. And what Puerto Rico has really shown within its identity is that there is something to fight for within your bloodline, because this is a beautiful island, that being the land of Borican, for the Taino, for the Taino ancestry that has lived on for technically millennia, and for something that should be kept and should be preserved, you should be standing up for your island, because this is something that nobody else should be telling you what to do, because this is an island that has been inhabited by great hardworking ancestors, and it should not be given up to unjustified tyrannical freaks that don't care about your island, and they care, they care more about themselves. And to me personally, I'm not trying to sound like some crazy, liberal or lefty, because I'm not. I'm very extremely discriminatory, for being a very tough, conservative minded person, but I'm more extreme to kind of go against the grain, against certain right wing people that don't, hold with the true value of being purely individualists. So I'm going to say things in terms of like what I truly believe in, and I'm going to kind of say whatever I need to say, because I do believe it is very important and people need to stand up for something. So, yeah, personally with me, I do believe Puerto Rico should very well secede from the US. How that should be done, I would say peacefully assemble. But if there's ever a means to defensively fight, in the sense of the U.S. wanting to, attack Puerto Rico, which I think that would be very dumb, because you're gonna just open up like a whole war of many other countries that are most likely gonna get behind it. Because it's like, if that means like, hey, you want to attack them, then that's going to trigger other nations to be like, hey, you know what? That'll be our opportunity to help them, and be like, hey, Brazil got your back, Mexico got your back. Shit, I mean, maybe even Argentina, they'll very well get behind it. Like, I mean, it's not always to be let the case off of that, but let's just say, if there's like, obviously, we live in like a more technological age where anything that the US does, they can easily be viewed as like a really bad enemy. So it's like, from the media perspective, it's like, do you really want to start a war with your own territory as the USA? And that's going to make you look like the horrible enemy. But the Puerto Ricans that are going to be fighting back, they're not going to put up with your mess, and they're going to fight to the death. So it's like, more so, that's just a war that you're going to be ending up losing, because politically it's going to ruin you, but it's also going to exacerbate resources that are going to destroy you more over time. So I think the U.S. would end up, like, basically it'll end up being like a Vietnam situation, but it's like, why the hell would you even want to think about bombing, let the island at all? Because, like, if anything, it's gonna probably spark wars, within the U.S. that nobody doesn't want to see. But then on top of that, the Puerto Ricans are gonna get a lot stronger, getting weaponry, from other nations. So it's like, don't start something that you can't win, because it's like, that's probably something that could be like a World War III like effect, just simply because of like the secret like alliances that certain nations can have. But more so just the defensive aspect. If more people stick up, like, within Puerto Rico, then that can very well like occur for that particular manner. So yeah, so I mean, overall, I would never want to see it go down like that. I think peacefully, the U.S. should leave Puerto Rico alone. If it does end up coming to a point where maybe like I don't know what's really going on within like the global world of politics, but I do believe the UN had a particular meeting where they wanted to bring Puerto Rico into the conversation of stating if Puerto Rico, deserves to have their independence be granted, which, I mean, it is a country of its own. It's just under invasion. And before anybody tries to like come at me for that. Let me just be clear. Like, nations do exist while they're being invaded by other countries under colonial control. So, like, I can kind of use like a nation like Somalia. Like, Somalia isn't really a unified country within principle, but they have multiple different tribes of people that have been colonized by other African tribes. And that's why you see in Somalia, there's at least 19 governments going at it with each other. But if that's not a good example, let me use Kurdistan. Kurdistan is a great example of a nation that people do stick up for each other and they do have a true cultural identity. But you have stupid nations like Turkey that say, "Oh, Kurdistan, they're not a real nation. They're just technically us that just don't want to admit that they're Turkish." But the truth is that Kurdistanis are their own people and they do have their own identity. So it's like the Kurdish people have their true identity, but the Turks just don't want to see them be their own thing because these people are somehow a threat to them when they're clearly not. So it's like that does exist. Like you have nations that are under invasion every single, time frame. Whether that nation, isn't big enough for people to live there and then people can't like somehow fight enough, that is still a country that is under political invasion of other countries. I guess I'll use other examples, that being Hawaii. That's a nation under invasion from the U.S. government because Hawaii was clearly turned into a U.S. state against the consent of the people when the U.S. government went in there, and then they particularly installed their own, I guess like governor slash political, rulership over the kingdom. So it's like the Hawaiian people ended up, just accepting the fact that the U.S. took them over, and Hawaii to this day, they're basically sticking with the American, I guess the, American empire for now. But, at this current time frame, Hawaii doesn't need to be part of the U.S., at all. So Hawaii can very well leave the U.S. at any given time, but it's like if they choose, if they try to leave now, a lot of like Americans would be like, oh well, if they leave now, that's just gonna cause like a big problem with other countries wanting to invade them, and how would they be able to sustain as a country without us? So it's I mean, pretty much, that's pretty much not the same thing. How should I say it? Like any other country that is like smaller, or they're not really like the type of nation to like really be attacking other countries, but they just want to be left like alone. Like that's basically what Puerto Rico is. Puerto Rico is like a defensive turtle that's ready to strike when it's being when it's being like attacked, and therefore other well, I don't really like to kind of use like the animal kingdom as like a good example, but like if y'all know what I'm saying, it's like Puerto Rico is that type of island slash country where it's like people just do whatever they need to do, but it's like if you have unwanted visitors or unwanted people that are trying to tell you, oh, you can't live your life basically without us type nonsense, where people are being tyrannical like oppressors, that gives you more than every single right to wanting to use violence against those people, because it's like those people are invading your way of life. They are aggressing upon your your civil particular liberties. So I mean that's what the US and Spain has always been to Puerto Rico, and Borican should live on and be prosperous for the people that have lived there, and the people that preserve the native traditions for the Taino. Obviously, with the African traditions, that people, do honor that. But the Spanish traditions, that's not something that people care for. but it's like that's not something people, just honor and just say, oh, well, thank you, Spaniards, for giving me something that I never asked for. No, like I'm not like, I don't praise myself for being Spanish, and I don't. But guess what? Like, it's part of like my bloodline for now. But maybe within a couple generations from now, like Tainos will easily, be back on top, and their bloodline can easily re-influence, time a lot faster. But more so, it's more about keeping traditions, together of what's important to people, and people shouldn't have to be taking anything from anyone where people are having to be like attacked for the wrong reasons for simply sticking up for their bloodline and for their culture. So I mean that's just basically how Puerto Rico is, because like, a lot of Puerto Ricans are very disconnected from cultural identity, and they only just think about the Spanish aspect to say, well, everything is just Spanish. Everything that the Spanish aspect is within Puerto Rico, you just have to just live with that, and that's just what we are. And it's like, no, that's not that's not what the quote unquote Baricuas are. But it's it's just like the same stupid argument that you hear with people that make like the whole claim about being Mexican, and people just always basically project to the Spanish aspect of being Mexican, and that's not true. Mexico is home to many different cultural aspects, not only just within Spanish bloodline, but also to the Aztecs, to the Mayans, to the Olmec people, to the Otomi tribe. There's so many tribes that people don't talk about, but if you get rid of like the violent, like aspects within Aztec culture, and you look at like the more peaceful Aztecs, or peaceful Aztecs along with peaceful Mayans that have created civilization for people to basically come together and create some sort of community to be decentralized within their bloodlines, that has existed. And other central, yeah, like other parts of Central America had had also followed, to that tradition as well. But yeah, that's pretty much the same thing for for Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico is very prominent for that type of bloodline, especially with the Taino bloodline, and then the African bloodline. But I mean, the African bloodline, that's basically like a minority, like in terms of how much influence the African heritage has been brought, to the Caribbean islands, which that was most likely brought through the South American slave trade with the transatlantic slave trade per se. But uh, yeah, I mean more so, like everything that has been equalized out with its diversity. Like a lot more people are more connected with the African culture and then the Taino culture. So it's like the Spanish culture is there. People just leave it for what it is, but they don't really conjunct themselves with that culture. So it's like everybody is equally divided, but they kind of like live their own life to be happy for who they are, and then they try to like make a difference to do something better. And then on top of that, people want to make political changes so therefore they can be better for their island. So granted, for myself, I'm not from Puerto Rico, but I will say, like, within the people that I have met within my life, growing up within my family, and even though that I wasn't able to see my real grandfather, which like I'll talk about that in another video one day. I will say that I'm happy enough to speak to Puerto Ricans that actually, enjoy their cultural heritage, but the people that don't, I tend to wonder like why those people try to talk smack up against their own bloodline, and then yet they don't do anything about their own bloodline when their people are failing, whenever people are suffering, when it, whenever it comes to like a hurricane, or even when people that try to brag about being Puerto Rican and then they don't do anything about it to even fix it, because it's like they're just using them as like a political means to use those people to kind of like be like, oh well, like I'm pretending as if I care about them, but in reality, yeah, in reality, oh man, like I'm sorry, yeah, like I'm so sorry. In reality, you're not doing nothing for it. And I mean, like I tend to see that within the other neighboring countries, that being Cuba, the Dominican Republic. I don't really look into Haiti and the Jamaica and all that. So like specifically within like the neighbors within Puerto Rico, that being Cuba and the DR. Like those aspects, between their peoples are definitely, within the divide, mindset that people do have. And I mean, that's really credited, well, that's more so, like, how should I say, that's more so sprouted from the Spanish, casta system that people have, up against each other, where people don't treat each other equally, and therefore people have racist, intentions to hate, yeah, to hate each other, and therefore people want to, go to war with each other over senseless things, and then therefore people, have this very vigilant, violent mindset to look at, to look at each other a certain type of way, simply because I don't like you because of like your skin color, and therefore I want to look at you as my forever enemy, and therefore, there's never going to be any, particular, yeah, there's never going to be any particular respect because I want to dominate you and I want to hurt you. So I can see that being a thing per se, but just to kind of like make things a little bit easier, especially with like the whole situation with Puerto Rico. The economy is definitely like the biggest problem. The economy needs to get fixed. Politically, the secession would be a lot better for the island. Um, Having it, become a U.S. State rather than a territory would just be a massive problem, where you're just gonna invite political corruption from U.S. Politicians, and with the amount of mess that Donald Trump is wanting to bring to Puerto Rico, especially with all the crazy nonsense that he says one thing and then he kind of like backtracks and says like another thing. No, like why would you want to add Puerto Rico to the list of American states that are going to deal with the worst of the worst people, destroying its economy, and then on top of that, whenever there's a civil conflict, Puerto Rico has to get involved, like into that. No, dude. I rather keep everything neutral and screw that. Do not have the USA tell the island of Puerto Rico what to do, because you want to have a Cerberus demon warlord dog like the U.S. to tell you what to do. Like whenever the U.S. engages into civil conflict, with what the world, in terms of military warfare and all that. Nah, dude, that's something that I don't think nobody ever wants. But having to become America's sidekick partner to just fight up against evil, quote unquote, against global terrorism, I don't think nobody wants to be signing up to the U.S. military draft and being used as like a basically cannon fodder to fight in some senseless war that nobody asks anyone to get into. So yeah, I mean overall, I think Puerto Rico, as far as its scalability of like where things are at, there's a lot of great things that Puerto Rico can have. I like personally with me, man, if I like if I could go back in time and just fix anything, obviously I would destroy all the colonial influence, but I would also try to help people and be a good companion to advance people's lives and create advance cities to help those people grow. And I do know that Puerto Rico will be there one day. I do believe within my heart, before I pass away, and I would hope that day can come one day where people can prosper and the island can be as successful as you see it now. And I know that it will, because I do believe that the people that do live there have a true heart, for not only sticking up for the indigenous ancestry, but also like making the island as successful as it is because people have a passion for it. And I know within my family, there's something that motivates me. You know, anytime that I see my biological grandfather's pictures where I want to do something to to make a contribution. And even though that I do have like my non-biological Puerto Rican side, I do end up having that motivation from them that makes me want to just do something in real life for the people. And I do know that day will come, but when it does, I will do the best I can to be the best person that I can be. Not only for Puerto Rico, but for all the other cultures within the Caribbean, and mostly specifically within Cuba and the DR, because like I care about those two other islands. But I mean, that's just how I am. So yeah, that's pretty much it, man. Even though that I didn't want to go 47 plus minutes, but I wanted to kind of speak like my mind out. So yeah. I hope you guys enjoyed that, and definitely be sure to rate, comment, and subscribe. And I'll definitely make like another video talking like about Puerto Rico, in the future. I could have definitely talked about more things, how should I say, like about Puerto Rico, but I guess I'll probably talk about that, like another day, because I wanted to bring up like other issues with Puerto Rico, especially with the whole Trump administration nonsense with what he's been saying about Puerto Rico, and then other BS crap. So, all right, I'll see you guys later. I will catch you guys on the next one. And long live Puerto Rico, aka Boricán, and I will see you guys again. So, hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I will catch you guys, in the next video. All right, I'll see you guys. Bye.